to kickstart our conversation. This is the second interview we're having on News Check. In case you're just joining us, we want to talk about enhancing digital learning in the country. And earlier I told you the COVID-19 pandemic, out of all the effects it came with, it taught us very big lessons. One of them is how to adjust to the new normal. The new normal in most learning institutions, of course, I beg your pardon, is, transitioning from the ordinary physical learning in the classroom environment to an online kind of an arrangement where learners are accessing education via the online means. And this has come with a lot of challenges for learning institutions and a lot of integrity issues also being questioned. And we want to explore the online learning environment to see to it how learning institutions are adjusting and what can be done to address some of the challenges that learning institutions are facing currently. And to help me understand that is none other than Professor Washington Okeyo. He is the Vice Chancellor of the Management University of Africa. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Serfin.
All right, so I want to understand, first of all, from your own perspective, there's a lot that other institutions have shared as to how this changed their life and their way of doing things. From your organization, from your institution, what is it, how would you say COVID-19 affected your institution?
Thank you very much, Serfin, for having me in the studio. As you've said, my name is Professor Washington Okeyo. I'm the Vice Chancellor of the Management University of Africa. Management University of Africa is a university that offers university education, obviously, and specifically in the niche of leadership, management, entrepreneurship, and governance. Mm-hmm. That is our main focus. And Management University of Africa has students that are learning those areas of specialization. So when COVID-19 struck way back in 2020, in March last year, it was affected, the university was affected by COVID-19, just as other universities were affected. Now, the challenges that came along with the COVID-19 included, obviously, the universities were closed, were shut off completely from physical access to students. And therefore, it meant that the universities had to look for means and ways of making sure that the students continued learning, albeit in a situation which was not normal per se. And the universities had to invest in a lot of additional facilities. For example, initially, the universities were not using a lot of online learning and a lot of virtual learning. And this online learning and virtual learning became the norm, and therefore the universities had to buy additional equipment, mm-hmm. Additional facilities like the medium for communication, for example, the bundles, the laptops, the Android phones, and so on and so forth. But this is on side of the universities. On the side of the students also had to acquire, these additional gadgets. Yeah. Exactly, equivalently. Although it required that the students spend additional money over and above the fees that they used to spend. So they had to ensure that they bought the laptops, they bought the bundles, and so on and so forth. So Management University of Africa aided the students or assisted the students in terms of getting into partnership with organizations that offer some of these gadgets. For example, the service providers of the bundles. We got into arrangement with service providers of the bundles so that they could sell them cheaper, in a cheaper rates, yeah? Exactly, to our students. And also entered into partnership arrangements with organizations that sell laptops and computers. And they were able to sell laptops and computers to our students at much reduced rates.
All right. Yeah. Let me take you back to the university, the institution itself. How difficult was it for you to adjust, and how did you navigate when you saw the need that it's no longer a choice, we have to move online? Was it a difficult transition, and how did you navigate?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Serfin. It was, of course, a difficult situation to navigate, because one thing, like I said earlier, COVID-19 caught everybody unawares. And normally when you are caught unawares, you don't know how to react. And it was not a situation that we could have planned, for. And because of that, we had to put in place, remedial measures very quickly. And that called for setting up a central command where we would establish communication with our stakeholders, especially the students. And we had to set up teams that were in charge of each and every aspect of the student life and the university activities. We also had to make sure that these teams were able to communicate with the students. So there was a structured process that we went through. And every communication, every activity that required the students and other stakeholders of the university to go through or undertake were communicated to them in a very, very structured manner. So the university was caught unawares, yes, but we reacted very, very fast to ensure that our students continued learning in the new normal, as it is called. Yeah.
Did you have like pre-existing mechanisms of online learning, or you had to start from scratch? I mean, by even enlightening the students on this new online learning environment, even the lecturers understanding how to lecture online. Was it something you were doing prior that you had to just build up on, or you had to start from scratch like other institutions?
Yeah. There's some semblance of online learning that we had in the university. It's
before
called
COVID.
Yes, before COVID. Okay. It's called online distance and e-learning that we used, and a section of our students were actually learning on that particular platform. So when COVID-19 struck, we were not caught totally unawares. We are not caught totally, below the belt in terms of online learning, because there were students who were already learning, and we already had some materials, programs, learning materials, teaching materials, and so on that we're using in that particular platform, although it wasn't for all the students. However, there's a difference between online learning and virtual learning. Online learning is where students are sent materials via, an established online system, and then they access it through that online system, and then they can read, they can interact with the lecturers, although it is not real time. However, virtual learning is where now students are taught through the telephones, through the Zoom method, through the Microsoft, Meet platform, and so on and so forth.
And it's real time.
And it is real time. That is the difference. Okay. That we didn't have. Okay. But we had to quickly adjust and bring in that kind of system into our learning system, our learning stream, so that we could use it. And to do that, we got in to arrangements with the providers of this kind of online platform. We got in touch with the Zoom. We got in touch with Microsoft, suppliers of Microsoft services, and we entered into formal arrangements with them. And that is what we started using immediately. The COVID-19 started. So that augmented our ODEL, so to speak, system.
All right. Prof, I'd like to understand, what would you then describe in terms of the country's investment on infrastructure and even digital literacy? If we say we want to embrace digital learning, have we really focused on that, being a stakeholder in the sector? Do you think we have been sensitive to investing, having the right infrastructure put in place, having the right knowledge about digital learning and digital teaching, available to those who are in the learning curve?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Now, in terms of being prepared, in terms of putting into place infrastructure and so on for digital learning, I would say that there is some infrastructure that can be used for digital learning. However, the way the universities and the education system in the country operates is that it isn't the responsibility of, say, the government to do that per se. It is left at the hands of the universities, it is left at the hands of the schools and other institutions to identify their needs, because the government is playing an enabling role here of enabling, coming up with the policies and regulations to regulate the technology that comes into the country. So once that is done, it is upon the universities, it is upon the learning institutions to identify and say that we need this kind of platform, which the government has already, sort of allowed through a policy to be brought into the country, so that I go for it. So in terms of preparedness of the universities and other institutions of learning, that is where the rubber meets the road for digital preparation, really. Because, and again, it is an issue of expectation. Did the universities and other learning institutions expect that at some point they would require to go full blast on online learning and virtual learning? The answer is no. Because they did not foresee a situation where the physical interaction would be cut off completely. And indeed, this has caught the entire world totally unawares. So it's not possible to say that we could have done some scenario analysis to say that if this manifests, then this is the way we would, would handle it. It would be difficult to sort of have expected the universities and other learning institutions to totally prepare themselves to mitigate what would come in this particular case. But because technology was available, because online learning alternatives were available, interactive virtual learning systems were available, and hardware was available. Already we have, the mobile telephony, we have the Android phones, we have the laptops, and so on and so forth. So it shouldn't have been difficult for an institution to transist. It called for an organized sort of way of handling the situation, identifying that these are the problems that has come to us. So how do we go about it? We have all the software here, we have all the technology here, we have all the hardware here, and so on and so forth. So all we need to do is plug in our needs into these, systems.
But Prof, still, you've talked about the enabling environment that the government has created, and you've talked about even as institutions having this hardware that is needed and the software that is needed. All they need to do is to plug in their needs. But when COVID struck and when there was that need to embrace digital learning, what stood out was how big the number of learners who could not access the online classes was. There was conversations about the cost that it came with, how many learners can access these gadgets. There was questions about the internet connectivity in the country. Some parts of the country were still locked out of the internet. And these are questions that emanated. So the reason I asked you how you would gauge or describe our level of investment in these issues is just for you to address whether this is true or how you feel about this particular matter.
Yes, thank you. I think it is right to say that a lot of people are inconvenienced by COVID-19, not just in the education sector, but also in the other sectors. Social life basically was totally, put to shambles. And the preparedness in terms of the readiness of availability of tools and equipment to handle this situation can be put to question, because it wasn't really the issue of we can tackle this using a specific type of equipment or a specific type of system. No, that wasn't the case. Everybody was trying a lot of trial and error. And that trial and error, eventually, if somebody got it right, then that person succeeded. Indeed, students were heavily inconvenienced, because you mentioned the issue of availability of the hardware and the technology. Technology could be available, yes, but is it available everywhere? Is it reliable technology? People keep on giving examples of far-flung areas in Kenya. We talk about Mandera, we talk about Marsabit, we talk about Turkana, we talk about Busia, and so on, these places which are very far. And therefore, even if you have technology centrally, for example, in Nairobi or in the major cities of the country, that technology may not be very helpful, in these particular far-flung areas. And our students come from all over the country. We have students in Turkana, we have students in Mandera, we have students in Busia, we have students in Vanga, towards Kwale down the coast, and so on and so forth. So it is not true to say that we could handle all the students equally. Yeah. It depended on where the students are. And, but we made sure that even students who are out as far as Turkana, where technology is not very reliable, that we could establish for them communication through the ODEL, or online distance and e-learning platform, which is non-interactive. The major problem is the interactive platform. Yeah, so we used both systems complementary.
So innovation,
complement each other.
Innovation was key.
Yes,
for
exactly.
you to navigate in this process. Yeah. As a stakeholder, I'd just like you to also share with us what you think can be done to change the narrative for us to get to a point where learners can access, can afford, and can interact with the online learning environment effectively. What is it that we need to change? How much ground do we need to cover? Based on the challenges you have experienced so far, like who should do what,
yes, for
us to really have a sort of a compromise for all learners to be brought on board, because no one is to be left behind.
Yes, I think the major role goes to the government. The government needs to come up with policies around use of technology, around use of virtual learning systems, around use of computers and so on in for learning. I say the government because everything starts at a policy level. So if the government has not crafted a policy that will make sure that all students, wherever they are, access learning. Of course, right now there is the right to learning, which is enshrined in our Constitution. But then it needs to be broken down at the policy level to guide the players both in the industry and also in the education sector, so that it can be done in a more focused manner. That is number one. Number two, the technology providers, they need to go an extra mile and make sure that the technology that they provide is available throughout the country. And then they need to look at the needs of the user of that technology. For example, if the user is a student and the student is way out there in Turkana, for example, other technology systems like the mobile telephony, like the ability to use bandwidth and so on, easily accessible out there in Turkana as it is in other places like the major cities of the country. So it again goes to the service providers. They need to make sure that they cover themselves, they cover the whole country, fairly equitably in terms of availability of technology and systems. If you go to countries outside, like the United States, like the UK, Japan, and so on and so forth, they have sort of laid out their technology in terms of the convenience of the user. And their technology goes to every single corner of those countries, so that it doesn't matter whether you are in the city of New York or you are at the far-flung areas in
still access.
Exactly, Dallas, Texas, and so on and so forth. You can still access technology very exactly.
Will we ever get there as Kenya?
Yeah, but we already have those examples. Yeah. So the question is, how can we now establish our plans so that we move towards. I know it cannot happen overnight, but it is something that we seriously need to think about, because we already see it happening. We need to do what we call scenario planning. We need to plan and see what are the options that are available for us, and sort of analyze and say, if a situation like this manifests, how can we handle it? And if a different situation manifests, how can we handle it? Then the other angle to ensuring that this the level of preparedness is appropriate to the students is now in the education providers, the players like the universities, like the schools, like the other institutions. They now need to make sure that they themselves have proper plans in place to address the issues of their students' needs. So that if a student needs to learn online, what is it that they need to put in place to ensure that that student's learning is not interrupted by lack of technology, by lack of systems, by lack of software. The same thing with virtual learning. So there are those three levels. One is at the government level, Number 2 is at the service providers level. Number 3 is at the education sector players level.